The story of the parable of the sower is probably one of the best known stories of the Bible, and we actually hear it twice today. Jesus tells it once to the crowd, and then it's not indicated to you in the reading today, but then there's a gap of several verses, and then he retells it, explaining it to his disciples. Why is Jesus telling them this story at this time in the narrative? It's happening in the kind of the first end of the first third of the Gospel of Matthew, where he has been traveling around teaching and healing and being challenged by religious authorities who aren't buying it, that he's the Messiah, that he's the Son of God. And there are lots of other people who just aren't so sure. But in fact, there are a lot of people who are listening to him, because if you remember, it says that he got out in a boat because there were such crowds coming to hear them on the shore that he had to get perspective and get away from them by getting on the water itself. So that is why he's telling people about some receiving the news, some receiving it but then falling away, and then others really receiving it and acting upon it. Why was Matthew telling the story? Well, Matthew was telling the story 70, 90 years later because he was trying to explain to the followers of the church why other people weren't going with them. Remember, there was a large Jewish population around Jerusalem and the surrounding areas, and not everybody became a follower of Jesus. Quite a few did, but not the majority. And so Matthew was explaining that to some people the news never even penetrates. To some it does, but just for a little while. It's very shallow. Others, they receive it with joy, but then they get distracted in some way. Others, there are thorns around them, and so on. And then there are these people who receive it and act upon it, and they're going to be very fruitful. So Matthew is dividing people up into categories of people who are not at all receptive to people who are highly receptive. I don't think when Jesus told this story, he intended to say, there are these people, these people, these people, these people, and you lovely people. And the reason I say that is that Jesus was constantly challenging the disciples. He says, why aren't you hearing me? Why aren't you acting upon my word? So he was constantly challenging his own disciples to not be in those first categories which aren't so good at passing on the good news of Jesus. So I'd like to focus on the people who aren't bearing a lot of fruit. I'd like to focus on the rocky ground, whether it's literally the pavement, it can't seem to penetrate at all, or the actual rocky soil. We have an advantage over first century farmers. They really didn't know much, it appears, about amending soil. Maybe they were successful in other ways. We now know that there are a lot of things you can do to transform rocky soil, rocky ground, into very fruitful soil. So if you can picture rocky or hard ground, it sometimes has, it's kind of hard on the top. It has a few cracks in it from the sunlight. And there are two ways that the soil gets amended. One is through water, whether our sprinkler systems or the rain. And usually the way soil is watered is through droplets, little droplets coming from rain or sprinkler systems. And the droplets are actually beating on it, but just in a very small little bits of water, bit by bit. Comes down into those cracks in the soil and starts to work away at that soil and break it up. Very slowly, over time. Then the other way, as those of you who are using your green waste bins know, is through compost, through adding organic matter to soil. The organic matter does two things. It provides nutrients to the soil, especially nitrogen, to make it fertile soil. And it also makes it friable or break-upable. It makes it break-upable. If you've ever been digging in soil, you know the difference between friable soil and the still rocky, hard soil, right? And so putting organic matter, living matter into things over time amends the soil and makes it more receptive to growth. What I'm suggesting is that what Jesus is suggesting through this parable is that we are changeable, that we may be unreceptive and become more receptive and eventually be like the sower himself, casting out good news to other people, spreading the message to other people. And I have a perfect example of this in the story of Jacob and Esau today. Now, how many of you know the whole story? You've read Genesis, you know the whole story of Jacob and Esau. Oh, sorry, you're hesitant, but okay. So maybe a third of you. So I'm just going to give you the bare outline of it. You've heard the beginning of it. Rebecca has something warring in her womb. She says, I can't take it anymore. I'm going to die. She prays to God, and God explains to her, you have two nations in your womb. They are going to be divided. And we know them to be, as they're born, Esau and then Jacob. And he tells her, the older will serve the younger. So he's going to upend the usual heredity patterns of their society in which the oldest son will inherit all, and the younger normally serves the older. So fast forward now, the part you hear in the story is that they have grown up, and Jacob is a wise and somewhat scheming and, thinking man who spends time in the tents. He's like the MBA working on his next entrepreneurial idea. And Esau is a man of the forest. He wants to go out and hunt. He wants to get game. He likes food. He and his dad bond over sports and poppers. That's who Esau is. And Esau comes in from days of hunting and apparently has not been successful because he says to his brother, give me some of that good stuff you got because I'm really hungry. And Jacob, without batting an eye, says, then give me your birthright. And he says, fine, I'm famished, give it to me. And he just wolfs down that food. And then the biblical narrative says, and so Esau despised his birthright. In other words, he's the one who threw it away, not that scheming Jacob and his scheming mother, Rebekah. Well, if you know the story, Rebekah says to her son Jacob, your father's getting old, pretend you look and smell like Esau. Go ask your blind and nearly deaf father for your birthright. And he does. He gets the blessing. Esau finds out, he comes back, and he realizes that his father has basically written the will out to his brother through this blessing. I'm just using the terms of our day. So he's out, and there's no way to change the will in their time. Can't change the will. So Isaac's weeping, Esau's weeping, and the mother says, you better run, Jacob, because Esau says he's going to kill you. Jacob runs for decades, and decades later, he has 2 wives, he has 12 children, he has livestock, uncountable amounts of livestock, servants, also slaves in that time, but servants, people who work for him, do his bidding. And Jacob decides to go back to his brother. Now, why would you do that when you got plenty of land, plenty of people, plenty of animals, you're rich beyond belief? Because Jacob wants to reconcile with his brother. But Jacob, being the smart, scheming, thinking man that he is, says, I will send everybody in front of me in case my brother is sending an army to attack me. But what happens is, and he says, tell him that these gifts are his, the livestock is his, you can have some of my slaves, you can have them, take it, it's yours, Esau. And Esau cuts through all of that, and he says, brother, what are you doing? I don't need this, I have plenty. And he falls upon his neck, and they weep. Now, is that a man who despised his birthright, or a man who decided Jacob is the one who deserved it? What the story shows is the ability of 2 men to change dramatically. Jacob, who has been fighting, working very hard, being a man of God and listening to God, but nevertheless scheming to get what he needs because the world's not giving it to him. And Esau, hanging behind, staying on his father's land even though it wasn't really left to him. And the 2 of them realize that what's more important to them than the things of the world are holding on to this bond they have as brothers. And their hearts change. But their hearts softened gradually over time, like rocky soil that needs years of being amended before it's finally fruitful. What it shows us, this story, is a perfect illustration of what Jesus is talking about in this parable, is that change is possible gradually over time, and that we should never give up hope about people's ability to change or our ability to change. I want to give you another example from the Pride Parade. So I've been attending the one in San Diego since 2016. I did it 4 times, and then it was canceled in 2020 and 2021. I didn't go in 2022 because I was on sabbatical, and then I went back this year. And if you haven't seen it, what happens is there's a large parade route starting at University Avenue and then turning on 6th Avenue past Balboa Park The streets are lined on both sides with people who are identify as LGBTQ and their supporters, lots of them, and then all sorts of groups marching. And for years, the Episcopal Church has marched behind the banner of the cathedral, and then there are a bunch of churches, members of churches from around the diocese who go with them. And we priests are given, the bowls of water and the rosemary limbs so we can sprinkle people like we do when we're baptizing you, when we asperge you. And so I, like a lot of other priests, I run along the street and I just sprinkle water on people and I say, Happy Pride, God blesses you. Happy Pride, God blesses you. When I did this in 2016, 2017, and 2018, I would say a lot of times I was met with an angry, crossed arms like this. People turning away from it, or people pretending they were diabolical, so I would spray water on them and I'd say, God bless you, and they'd go, ah! Joking, but nevertheless implying that I thought that they were unholy. And I said, no, you are not unholy. So that was, I would say, a fairly common reaction, people resisting, pulling back. And those people may have identified as LGBTQ, or they may have been supporters who were pulling away from church people. Why? Because for a lot of people, the church has been the voice that is telling them, you are not a full and healthy human being. You're either mentally disordered, and that's the best news coming out from churches saying negative things, to you are sinful, your very nature is sinful and you need to change. Your way of life is sinful. And so because they've received that message, they have become hardened to any possible good news that might come from a church. But after years of little sprinkles of blessing, just little sprinkles, once a year, it's not every day even, or every Sunday, we're talking about once a year, I saw this tremendous change because in 2023, the most common reaction to me walking by with water was, bless me, bless me. I saw it for 3 miles, bless me. And I was shocked, happily shocked, because, I'm used to people seeing the collar and go running. Because the church has been bad news for LGBTQ people, dangerous in many cases to LGBTQ people, at best unloving, at worst threatening their lives. So, what I took from that, and this is finally when my sermon came to me, Jeff, because I have no sermon, God bless you, I have no sermon, God bless you, was I realized that after years of our sprinkling water on people, they finally said, you know what, they might actually be some Christians who are delivering good news to us. Actual good news. I saw a change of heart. And I wasn't upset when people were resistant to me trying to bless them. I understood it completely. But I realized, my gosh, years and years of our marching might actually be having a positive effect upon people. It was nearly universal as I hiked 3 miles of, along sidewalks throwing. I need Tommy John surgery now. I threw so much water, you would not believe it. The people from the cathedral kept chasing after me with gallon buckets of blessed water. That's how much water we were throwing out at people. Think about it, how that little effort, once a year, little sprinkles of water, has changed people's ability to be open to the word. And I'm not suggesting that they were unreceptive to it, but that they had heard a word that was supposedly from God that was causing them harm. It's been a huge transformation. It made me realize how God could be working on us as well, that we get little droplets of suggestions from people, little droplets of good news from the Bible, little droplets of prayers from somebody else. And it starts to work inside us and soften things inside us that had been hardened and even harmed in some way. So what words is God giving you to sprinkle upon our community? Because those people along the parade route aren't the only people who have gotten bad news from a church. So what good news can you give them?